Howdy everyone! For the next video in the Painting the Wasteland series, I'm going to show you how I'm adding some colorful details to my post-apocalyptic scenery and adding graffiti to building walls. I wanted to show you something I've been fooling around with, and that's a big old set of these paint markers. They've got two sides, the brush tip and a traditional kind of fine marker tip. See those there. And what they do, they're basically markers, but what they're dispensing is actually acrylic paint. And these are going to make an appearance again in the next video, so it's good to jump in and see how they work. Now, coverage is pretty good on them. These barrels here, which are part of the Monster Fight Club's urban scenery range, these have gotten one coat of the yellow. I'm going to go ahead and just put on another coat of the yellow. Now, I'm reasonably practiced with a brush. I certainly could do this with a brush, but even for me, it's pretty quick and easy just to paint on these lines with the marker. I think many of us have more control with a pen or a pencil than we do with a paintbrush. And for scenery, blocking in some basic colors like that, it's pretty quick and easy with these markers. I'd had my eye on these for a little while, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to think of them, if they'd be useful or not. So I wanted to try it out a variety of different colors, try it out on some different surfaces, and see what I thought. One of the things that I quickly found when I tried to use them on some miniatures is that they're a little bit too big to do very much with miniatures. And because you're laying down kind of a solid color, they're not necessarily, you're probably not going to paint a miniature with these. You're not going to base coat a miniature with these and then paint on it afterwards. It doesn't really make sense, I don't think. But for scenery, where you often don't necessarily need to go in and have quite the same level of highlighting and shading, I think these are going to be really useful. So, check this out. So I've got these yellow rims on the barrels, base coated with the yellow marker. And now I'm just quickly going in with the black paint marker and adding hazard stripes to it. This is a lot easier than doing the same thing with a brush, I think. And part of that is because you're able to use the width of the marker to control the width of the black lines. The other thing that's cool about this is that because the marker is actually laying down paint, it dries to a pretty similar finish to the paints you're already using. You sometimes see people using Sharpies or something on the miniatures, but Sharpies have, because it's not paint, it kind of has a different sheen, a little bit different look to it. I've never loved that. But these paint markers goes on pretty opaque, dries, probably kind of a satin finish. It's not ultra matte, but it's not super shiny or glossy. They're acrylic, so there's no particularly harsh or unpleasant smells that you can get with some permanent markers. It's just paint. And once it's dry, because you're then just working with dry acrylic paint, you can paint with a paintbrush on top of it. You can paint with another marker on top of it. They don't seem to bleed or run into each other. You can do a wash over it, stuff like that. You can do a little rust wash, something like that. Once you're done with the marker, you can basically just treat it like you painted it, because you have. All right, let's try something else. The black covers pretty well. One thing I did notice with the set is that the colors tend to be a little bit lighter. There's not necessarily a lot of deep saturated colors, but let's try the lightest color. Let's try a little white and see how that covers and whether or not that's useful for adding, a little gloss, a little glow, make these look like maybe little warning labels on the sides of the barrels. That's pretty good. That white is covering pretty nicely. Let's keep trying some more stuff. Let's grab this little kiosk here, also from Monster Fight Club, from their urban scenery set, and grab one this bright green. Oh, that's brighter than I thought it was going to be based on the color of the marker. That's a very bright green, but that's pretty cool for a little computer screen. So that's the marker tip. And then with the brush tip here, let's see. It's got a little computer screen here that I've previously painted black. I'll put a link down below for when I painted these miniatures. They're a fun little set. So on the computer screen here, let's see if we can use the brush tip, the kind of finer brush tip, to add some little kind of light green computery squiggles onto the screen. I kind of was curious to see how fine a line you could make with these markers. The answer is okay. The paint does pool a little bit out of the tip of the marker, making it, I'm not able to get quite as fine a line with this as I would with a brush maybe, But that bright green is covering black better than most bright green paints probably would. That would be a little bit challenging to do with a brush, just for coverage's sake. You'd get a finer line with a brush, but I don't think it would cover quite as well as this marker did. Yeah, it's also the case when painting scenery. At least for me, I'm painting scenery to get ready for games, to get stuff on the table. The bar is a little lower. Honestly, my scenery is often not painted quite as well as the miniatures, and that's really fine. The scenery is at a much bigger scale. You're generally not looking at it quite as closely, and it's okay if the colors are just kind of blocked in. You're kind of going for more of a general effect than anything else. So I was kind of curious to see some of the colors, see if some of the other colors were lighter. And that orange is pretty light. That's not bad. That's kind of like a bright hazard orange. I put little dots of it on the raised buttons there. Well, that's kind of cool. With scenery, just using these markers, I think, as a way to just add little pops of color to give some of the variety of color that you might find out in the world. I think that's cool. That way you can do a really fast paint job on the main part of the scenery, and then just add some little pops of color with the markers. You'll see that appear again in the next video. So just kind of exploring stuff here. I've got one of these sci-fi palettes, again from Monster Fight Club, and I was curious to just try using these markers to fill in these recessed letters as a way to kind of drop paint into a recessed area. They work pretty well for painting on raised areas, but I wasn't sure whether or not the markers would have the control to get the color in the lowered letters. And I'd say that's kind of a mixed bag. It's okay for scenery, but with a little bit of watered down paint, you might be able to do a better job of that. It's a little messy, and wiping it off the raised surfaces that it got on smeared a teeny bit of the red into the white, which is not ideal. Now, for doing something like this, where you're going back to painting a raised area, using the marker to do a little bit of edge highlighting, that's kind of a neat effect. That's pretty quick and easy to get a very solid, even line on the edge of that palette. The stiffness of the marker tip makes it so that it's kind of easy to put the color where you want it to be. So think about that bright green from earlier, because it really dried to a very nice bright green. Grabbed this barrel that I'd painted earlier that has kind of got some like bright green Hex-Wraith flame kind of radioactive ooze. I was wondering if I could paint on top some little like glowing, this is a really bright green, some little glowing dribs and drabs. See if that would look cool, almost to use this super bright paint marker green to highlight what I already had there. I think that's kind of a neat effect. Again, that's not anything you couldn't do with paint, on a brush. But I think this is a good option to be aware of, particularly because the coverage of these is so good. Getting that light color to cover nicely like that, it's pretty quick and easy. Hazard stripes are always fun. Let's try some more hazard stripes, but on a little bit larger surface area here. So I'm grabbing the yellow marker with the brush tip, and you can really see going on, it's putting on a nice, pretty even coat of paint straight away. It's going on a little thicker than I would want on a miniature. But again, for scenery on a flat surface like this, awesome. Let that dry for a second. They dry pretty quick, 5-10 seconds. It really is pretty fast, but you don't want to go wet on wet and smear stuff around. So yeah, grab the black marker, just kind of use the width of the marker itself to add some black stripes on top of the yellow. I think that's cool. That's fast. Is it the best result ever? Maybe not. Is it the fastest way to do that? Maybe. I'm not sure that I could do that faster with a brush. All right, one more thing I wanted to try here is taking some of the markers. The set came with some metallic markers, a silver marker, and to see if I could use that to do a little bit of weathering and chipping on the surfaces. And you can see here, I didn't cut this. I also didn't focus it that great, but it dries pretty fast. I didn't let that black paint dry, and the silver is still working just fine on top of it. And with the silver marker, you could potentially even use it to do a little bit of like scuffs and edge highlighting on a rusty metal surface. I think that's kind of neat, and that's not bad. It's just a nice basic bright silver. Yeah, I think what these little experiments are pointing out to me that having a set of these markers at hand when you're doing scenery painting. Probably not so much miniatures. You're not going to paint your scenery with these. But once you've done a real quick, big, fat, wide brush, paint job on the scenery, this set of markers can be very handy for just kind of adding some final finishing touches. Grabbing a lighter blue here. So this is a palette that I painted blue, gave kind of a some rust effects on. Just grabbing a light blue marker and adding a little bit of light blue, some little scratches and scuffs to some of the edges and corners. That's cool. Again, you could totally do that with a brush, but I think, I'm repeating myself here, but I think for scenery, having the opacity of these markers as a finishing step means that you can kind of do some quick, easy, final scuff, scratches, edge highlights, and colorful details in one pass that might be more challenging to do with a brush. So here's what I'm really excited about that I teased in the beginning of the video: graffiti with it. Now, getting into the Fallout miniature games, I knew I wanted to add some graffiti onto my scenery, but I wanted to figure out a quicker and easier way to do it. I'm going to speed this footage up 3x speed because I'm not sure that watching me draw is all that interesting. You're probably more interested in how well the markers are performing. I am not much of an illustrator. I am not much of a 2D artist at all. But the thing that I've found with miniature graffiti is that you kind of treat it a little bit more like doodling. Obviously, there's some amazing street artists out there that do incredibly detailed work, but that is not what I am shooting for. I'm going for some basic, kind of some tags, some symbols, some graphic lettering, that sort of thing. So for these letters, kind of just done some bubbly letters, blocked them in with the bright green, and then outlining them with the darker green marker. And hopefully watching this is useful. Hopefully it's interesting. And gives you some ideas of ways that you can use the markers, or you can apply these to your own scenery, your own hobby stuff. And I'd love to see what you come up with. Post some links down below to your own work. Tag me in those. That'd be cool to see what other people are doing. And watching this, hopefully you're seeing that these markers have nice coverage. Now this is just on a basic flat wall that I made out of some expanded styrene sheet, super basic scenery, but I think it would work just fine on anything else. I am seeing in the bigger light green areas of the letters there that one coat didn't fully cover the walls. I'm going to want to go back and just kind of fill that in with another coat of paint, but it's not bad. Similar for the orange here, this is a really big bright orange, and any one line has pretty good coverage, but to get a fully filled in flat paint effect, I think you're going to end up doing more than one coat. Now, the other thing that I realized that the brush tips, the brush side of the tips, they're a little more flexible and they're better at kicking out more paint. I think I realized that a little bit late and started pulling out the brush tip here. And you can see with the brush tip, you can do bigger, kind of wider strokes that are better for filling in the different areas. Now this is sped up, but I'm still not really letting stuff dry. That stuff dries fast enough that you can kind of just go in and do it without worrying too much. Do the red over the orange, do the yellow over the orange too. I did a little yellow highlight on the green. It hadn't dried much. So you can see here going in with a second coat, a second pass with the brush side, cleans up the letters nicely, kind of makes a little more solid and opaque. With the basic design knocked out, I grabbed the black paint marker again, and with the tip just kind of doing a cartoony, comic booky outline around the whole thing to try to create kind of a retro vibe a little bit. That's something that's going to be appropriate with a Fallout themed miniature game table, hence the nuclear theme here. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of doing a bigger, kind of more graphic lettered piece there. And now let's flip this piece of scenery over and try our hand at some smaller tags. Kind of do some basic stuff. You can really just kind of let your imagination go wild here. Do some basic, scrawled lettering. That's a nice little post-apocalyptic touch. Adding some little, greebling, adding some little spots and splatters on the outside of the lettering makes it look a little bit more spray painted. Do basic little Kilroy was here sort of graffiti. That blue's a little bit of an odd color, but yeah, it's fine. Spray paint comes in all colors. But with this, you can pretty quickly add on. I think the markers came in a 24 pack. There's other ones on too. I'll put a link to the markers down below. But pretty quickly add a variety of colors of graffiti to your scenery without cleaning your paintbrushes, or just quick and easy. That's kind of the theme of this. Is it optimal? Maybe not. Airbrush stencils would probably give you a slightly more realistic look. But for a quick and easy way to knock out a whole bunch of graffiti all at the same time, I'm more impressed by these paint markers than I thought I would be. Do some little scribbly tags. It's kind of fun. Just kind of choose a couple random letters, scrawl them on there, kind of messy. I think that's a neat effect. The other thing you can do is with the wide edge of the brush tip, you can kind of make it look like something that was painted on with a wide paintbrush rather than spray paint. And then using the thin bit of the marker to add some little drips. I think that little anarchy tag, I think that might be my favorite one I did. I think that really has a nice effect with the wide strokes and the dripping paint. Often when you see walls full of graffiti, that graffiti is, done on layers of previous paint jobs. So I wanted to try that out too, to see if I could do a little basic bit of graffiti and then put something else on top of it to kind of have that layered look. So I think that's kind of fun too. And of course, you could theme your graffiti to whatever game you're planning to use the scenery with, whether or not that's Fallout, or This Is Not a Test, or 40K, or whatever your post-apocalyptic grimdark flavor is. So to blend the graffiti into the scenery a little bit, I'm just going to grab some light gray paint and a sponge and just kind of sponge on a little bit of a kind of sponge stipple on a little bit of light gray paint to both the edges of the scenery and around the graffiti. I just help kind of beat it up a little bit. This expanded styrene sheet is pretty easy to carve into. Carve out a couple little bullet holes in the graffiti. Pretty easy to do. It's kind of a neat effect. For this one, I'm going to use a brush just to put a little bit of that light gray in the bullet hole. So the thing you can do is grab a little bit of water and water down some of that light gray paint. And this is using the paint markers. It's not using the paint markers exclusively, but with just a little bit of watered down gray paint over the whole thing, you can make the graffiti look a little more weathered and aged into the side of the building. And all I'm doing is just starting from the top of the wall and kind of wiping the paint off on the wall as I go down, which means that as you go down the wall, there's less paint on your brush and you get kind of a little bit of a natural fade effect. You can further grunge it up by adding some brown washes to the bottom, like kind of dirt and muck splatter from the ground. So this is just some of the Vallejo model wash. It's a pre-mixed kind of matte brown wash that you could achieve the same effect with some watered down paint. But it's just a little bit easier, and kind of grab one of those sponges you were using earlier to rough up the edges. You can just kind of do a swipe of the brown along the bottom of the wall and then rough up the top edge of that swipe with a sponge, kind of grime it up a little bit. And yeah, you can do that all over. I say so often in my videos, there's lots of extra steps. You can do the basics, you can add the extras, you can stop whenever you're happy with it. I actually think the brown layer does a little more work than even the gray sponging does to make the whole piece of scenery look kind of lived in. I think that's neat. There you go. So hopefully that gives you some ideas for your own post-apocalyptic scenery. I'm going to keep working on my table and bringing you more videos in the series of the Painting the Wasteland. And we'll see you next time on our next Jolly Lark.